I do like me some vampire movies. No, Twilight doesn't count. And I obviously like comics like Batman, even some Marvel stuff. In fact, Riley and I went to go see Spider Man No Way Home, and that was awesome when it was in theaters a few months ago. So, how would I review Morbius? So, we'll do non spoilers, then spoilers to give you an idea of where we're going with this. It's definitely nowhere near the same ballpark as Spider-Man No Way Home. So, yeah, Spider-Man No Way Home is like a professional baseball team. And by comparison, Morbius is down there with the latest Venom film. Well, you could probably say both Venom films. It's not bad, but it's not great either. So Morbius came out on April Fool's Day, April 1st, 2022, just a few days ago. Riley and I went to go see it Monday afternoon at the matinee, and there were four people there. Only four people, according to Riley. Her, me, and two others. That was it. So the budget for Morbius was $75 million. Not really a big budget for a movie like this. So it was a pretty small budget, and it definitely showed when it came to the effects and CGI. It was done by Columbia, Sony, Marvel Entertainment, not to be confused with the MCU, which is Marvel Studios over at Disney. Morbius was directed by some guy I never heard of, Daniel Espinosa. I looked at his list of films. They weren't very impressive. The score was also very underwhelming by John Ekstrand. I wasn't very impressed by the score or the directing either. Well, the cinematography is actually pretty decent. I'll talk about that in a moment. So the box office for Morbius so far, a few days after it officially came out, is $84 million. Looks like it may not be a total bomb, but Morbius is most likely not going to make a ridiculous amount of money. It's not going to get close to Spider-Man No Way Home financially. And it was a lower budget film. It stars Jared Leto as Morbius, along with Matt Smith, Adria Arjona, Jared Harris, Tyrese Gibson, who had a little faux pas on Twitter the other day. Poor Tyrese got trolled thinking that Martin Scorsese actually praised this film as the truest height of cinema. It's okay, Tyrese. You know, it happens to us all. Morbius is less than 2 hours long. It was also written by the writing duo Matt Suzama and Buck Sharpless, who have written Dracula Untold, Last Witch Hunter, Gods of Egypt. They also were involved in writing the Power Rangers 2017 film, story only according to Wikipedia. Not exactly a very impressive resume, and neither is Morbius. So non-spoilers first. The cinematography, I liked the cinematography. I think Riley liked it as well. It was pretty good most of the time. The acting was decent, nothing special. Matt Smith was okay, and sometimes a little over the top. Jared Leto, the method acting to extremes. According to some articles that came out recently, he was using the crutches even in between takes to a point where he was not even willing to go to the bathroom without somebody putting him in a wheelchair and rolling his butt over to a bathroom. That was how committed he was to walking around pretending to be disabled. I'm sure Matt Smith probably decided to put down his cane in between takes and actually walk normally. I mean, I know it's acting, guys, but, sometimes method actors can go a little too far. And this is not the first time that Jared Leto has gone a little too far with a role that he's portrayed. Now, when it comes to CGI, SFX, it's hit but mostly missed. There are some cool moments when it comes to the CGI, but I think because of that $75 million budget, they probably need a few more bucks towards CGI and SFX. So, yeah, hit but mostly missed. The story had some potential, but overall was pretty weak with the cliche, typical plot twist that you see coming from a mile away. And if you look at that resume like we talked about a moment ago from the writing duel with Dracula Untold, Last Witch Hunter, Gods of Egypt, and their involvement with the Power Rangers 2017 film, yeah, it's not exactly going to be up to the level as, say, for example, Spider-Man No Way Home, Avengers Infinity War, the first Iron Man, or most recently, the new Batman movie, which was really good. I did do a review about that a few weeks ago. Feel free and check it out. The PG-13 rating for Morbius hurt and held this movie back from its full potential. Prime example, Blade in 1998, starring Wesley Snipes, had a R rating. It was an awesome vampire comic movie. You had Deadpool a few years ago with Ryan Reynolds, rated R. That was an awesome movie. I cite those two examples because those are two comic-based movies with characters that should exist in an R-rated movie, Blade and Deadpool. The same should go for Morbius, which tries to be scary but plays it too safe with the violence, blood, and gore in what's supposed to be a vampire movie. It wasn't the worst movie I've seen, but it's far from the best. It's somewhere in the middle. It's meh as a comic book movie. It's easily forgettable. I mean, maybe the sequel will do better. It might make enough money to merit a sequel, but probably a similar budget, somewhere in the $75-80 million range. Hopefully, it'll get better writers. But I don't even think this is worth watching as a quote-unquote popcorn pleaser, because I was just probably almost ready for the movie to be over by the time it got to the end. I was just ready to get up and go. I'm like, okay, it's not the worst movie I've seen in a theater by a long shot, but I wasn't sitting there waiting and hoping for more. I was just ready for it to be done so I could go get some food and come home. But if you want to check out Morbius, do so at your peril. I would just recommend waiting to either get it on Redbox or maybe whatever streaming service Morbius happens to appear on in a month or so from now, because I doubt we're going to have to wait too long for this to become available as a VOD or through a streaming service. And it'll be probably considerably cheaper to watch Morbius from the comfort of your couch than at a movie theater, because the tickets are a bit pricey, and you also got to consider the concessions, which has always been expensive when it comes to movie theaters. In the end, it's just not worth going to see. Plus, there's other movies out there that are far better than Morbius. And I can even cite some vampire films that I would recommend. Lost Boys, the original Fright Night, Interview with a Vampire, Bram Stoker's Dracula. I mentioned Blade a moment ago. Another awesome vampire comic movie. Way better than Morbius. But I'll give Morbius some credit. At least it's not Twilight. Now let's talk about the spoilers. I'm going to not touch over everything, just the things that I noticed throughout the film. So it starts off with Morbius on a helicopter with a team landing outside of a vampire bat cave. I'm guessing it's in South America. And everyone else wants to leave because it's about to be dark and the vampire bats are going to come out. But Morbius is going to stay behind with some sort of weird-looking box. You've probably seen it in the trailers. And fast forward, he ends up using the box to capture some vampire bats for experimentation. But then there's another flashback to Greece, 25 years earlier, I believe, when Morpheus was a kid. And you also had him introduced to Milo, a.k.a. Lucian. They meet at this hospital in Greece, Morbius and Milo. They become like brothers because they have like the same condition requiring dialysis, and they're both permanently crippled. Milo, Lucian, whatever his name is, comes from wealth. I'm guessing, I think it's implied he comes from a wealthy family. Morbius is a genius. He actually saves younger Milo's life because his dialysis machine goes on the fritz. So Morbius like fixes the dialysis machine and saves Milo's life. And they're a mentor. The head doctor at this facility realizes that Morbius is a genius. So he makes arrangements to have Morbius sent off to a special school and have tuition cover his medical needs. And he promises he's going to look after Milo. And the doctor, the mentor of Morbius and Milo, to his credit, actually serves as a father figure to both Morbius and Milo. So he's a pretty good guy. And he's a great actor that plays the doctor. I believe it was Jared Harris. I've seen him in a lot of stuff. He's a stellar actor. And he did okay as the father figure role. Fast forward to present day, Morbius is a successful doctor. He's created this synthetic fake blood along with other treatments that have saved a lot of lives. He's also been credited to saving one of the FBI agents' lives, played by Tyrese Gibson. I guess in one of the wars that his character happened to be in that he alluded to. It was the fake blood that apparently saved his arm. So we hear about that in the movie. So obviously, Dr. Morbius has saved a lot of people's lives. And he and Milo are still crippled. They're still sick. They're still dying. And so one of the things that Morbius has been trying to do is come up with a cure for him, Milo, and others with the same condition that they have. Milo, being wealthy, is funding the research that Morbius has been doing. So Morbius manages to capture some vampire bats, bring them back to New York. He's conducted like 200 plus experiments, tests on these vampire bats, which means he's had to kill like 200 plus bats in order to dissect them and experiment on them with lab mice. Then after 200 tests, Morbius and Dr. Martine, a fellow doctor, love interest of Morbius, they finally come up with that 200th version of this test after 200 plus rats and bats are dead in order to stabilize this quote unquote cure for it to be used on a human. So we have Morbius goes to Milo. They walk over to Central Park and they have a chat about not wanting to die and willing to take this risk in order to take the cure. Milo agrees to fund this illegal operation with a team of mercenaries aboard a freighter out in international waters. So they're out in international waters. Morbius and Martine, his love interest or potential love interest, along with the mercs in this big freighter, middle of the ocean. I guess it's in the Atlantic Ocean, just off the coast. She injects him with the serum, and lo and behold, Morbius turns into a vampire and ends up killing all the mercs aboard the ship. And in the process, Martine, the love interest, she gets knocked out by one of the mercs. She ends up being taken to the hospital. The police, the FBI are involved now because they found all these dead mercs aboard this freighter that have had their blood drained because once Morbius became a vampire, well, he was a little thirsty. But Morbius manages to sneak back to his laboratory at Horizon, I think that's what it's called, and he starts conducting some experiments with the blue blood, the fake blood, synthetic blood, whatever you want to call it. And he notices that at the beginning, he can last 6 hours on fake blood, but it starts diminishing over time, which means eventually his ability to survive on fake blood alone is going to end, forcing him to drink real blood. During one of these experiments, Milo shows up stumbling into the lab and he helps out Morbius. Morbius basically tells him how this is cursed, how it's turned him into a vampire. And even though Milo still wants the cure himself, because Morbius did promise to cure Milo as well, they're best friends, they're like brothers. Plus, Milo did kind of sort of fund this whole operation. Morbius refuses to inject Milo. So poor Milo has to hobble out of the laboratory. I guess he goes and hides off in a room somewhere in the building. And then Morbius goes and hangs out with one of his patients. He passes out. And then somewhere along the way, Milo goes back into the room. He does have the password. He knows how to get into this area because, A, he's funding all this, and he knows Morbius's password. It's not a very difficult password. I think the love interest mentioned how easy his password was earlier in the movie. Milo grabs one of the two serums that Morbius brought back from the freighter, injects himself with it, and now Milo is also a vampire. His first victim happens to be a nurse that works at Horizon. Morbius is trying to escape the building after the nurse was killed, and he's questioned by the FBI agents, including Tyrese Gibson. To the credit of the FBI, they feel like something's amiss here, that this guy might be more involved in what happened on the freighter than he's letting on. So eventually, Morbius, his cover's kind of blown, so he goes into fight or flight mode. He attacks the FBI agents, and he manages to somehow quickly get up to the top of the building. And somehow Tyrese Gibson manages to get up to the top of the building as well and stop Morbius from escaping. I don't know how he was able to get up a flight of stairs or an elevator as fast as Morbius got up there, but okay. Morbius is in custody along with his fake synthetic blood, which was in a backpack. And then his good buddy Milo shows up, which at the moment, it still appears that he's crippled and he's acting all concerned for Morbius because they're brothers. Milo brings some red blood for Morbius to consume because the police, the FBI, are not letting Morbius drink the blue blood. It's now in evidence. But to, I guess, imply that Milo has in fact taken the injection and is also a vampire, Milo wasn't content with simply leaving the jail cell and walking away. He left his cane in the jail cell. So from that point, Morbius takes the cane and realizes that Milo is the one that killed the nurse. And so Morbius drinks the blood. He breaks out of the jail cell and then goes after Milo. And they have this conversation. They have this fight back and forth. Eventually, Morbius flies off into a subway. And so Milo's out there on a killing spree, and Morbius is now trying to stop Milo. The FBI eventually discover through CCTV cameras that it is some other guy, not Morbius, that's killing people. Even though several cops were killed in the subway, you'd think there would be CCTV cameras down there as well, but the FBI agents didn't bother to look at those CCTV cameras. They went to go look at CCTV cameras like the following night or a few nights later outside of a club in order to determine that it was actually two vampires, not one vampire. And it was the other vampire, not Morbius, that was doing all the killings. Well, except for the mercs on the freighter. But according to everyone else in the film, they were a bunch of scumbags anyways. I'm sure there wasn't even a single merc or hired gun aboard that freighter that was actually a decent guy that was just doing this because he was once in the military and this is all he knows how to do. And he's just trying to make a living in order to provide for his family and pay the bills. Yeah, some of them are probably scumbags. But hey, screw all the mercs. We can forgive those deaths. We just got to focus on all the deaths that Milo has been committing throughout New York, from the nurse to the cops and everyone else that he has murdered. So fast forward back to Milo's apartment. Milo's drinking. I guess he's having some sort of conflict going on. Meanwhile, yeah, Morbius and the love interest, they're back in a hidden counterfeit lab trying to come up with a quote-unquote vaccine or some way to poison and kill Milo. And I think it's implied that Morbius wants to use it on himself after he's done with Milo because he feels like becoming a vampire is a curse and he doesn't want to go out and kill people for blood. Back at Milo's apartment or condo, you have the father figure mentor show up and they have a conversation and, well, basically it doesn't end so well for the mentor. Milo mortally wounds him and then runs off. And then the father figure ends up calling Morbius. Morbius shows up just as he's about to die. And then lo and behold, guess who managed to go get the love interest and lures Morbius to the love interest right before he mortally wounds the love interest. So Milo has killed the father figure of both him and Morbius. And he has technically killed the love interest, Dr. Martine. But as she's about to die, Morbius reaches in to kiss her. And I think she actually bites him in his mouth and like rips a piece of flesh off or some blood. It like goes into her mouth and she does this like tongue thing. It's just really cringe. And you know what this implies? It implies that she's going to come back as a vampire. Morbius does end up drinking some of her blood. I'm guessing he didn't drink all of her blood. He drank just enough so he could end up in a final fight against Milo. So they end up in this epic final fight above New York. They end up crashing down into a tunnel. And it seems like Milo is going to win. Of course, that's the way this always goes, right? It was always the best friend or the brother that turns out to be the bad guy. And it seems like the bad guy's going to win, but something's going to happen and make the good guy win the day. And well, this does happen because Morbius has developed several powers as a vampire. He's strong. He can run up buildings. He can climb on walls. He can, claw people to death just like Milo can do. But the difference is Morbius, I think, has more powers. He has echolocation. He has bonded with the vampire bats that he was experimenting on and captured and brought back from Central South America, wherever he brought them from. So 200 of those bats were killed. But the rest of the bats are now cool with Morbius now that he's a vampire. They have this bond now. And so near the end of the film, when you have this final standoff between Milo and Morbius, and like they keep changing what Milo wants to do to Morbius. One moment Milo wants them to stand together as brothers against everyone else, and then the very next moment, this happens several times, Milo's trying to kill Morbius. So the writers can't even make up their mind as to what direction they want to go with Milo's character. And credit to Matt Smith and Jared Leto, they did the best they could with the material they were given. But in the end, the only way that Morbius can, pin down Milo in order to inject him and kill him, allegedly, is by using the bats. So he uses his echolocation. I think he does like a bat scream or something. And I'm guessing that a whole bunch of bats live in the sewers or tunnels underneath New York City. It couldn't have just been those vampire bats that were in this little bat tank back at his lab, because that was maybe several dozen of them. Not as many as there were when they were first brought back to New York City, because there was at least 200 others that have been conveniently experimented on, right? So you have all these different bats show up to team up with Morbius, all Batman style. Definitely had a lot of homages to Batman, or inspiration from the Batman movies, especially the Dark Knight trilogy, like Batman Begins, for example. And, I see the comparisons because I'm a huge Batman fan. And so Morbius uses the bats to slam Milo back onto the ground, pin him onto the ground, and then he injects Milo. And Milo allegedly dies from the vaccine, poison, whatever. And then all of a sudden, out of the tunnel, all the bats fly up into the skies of New York City at night. So you have the skyline of New York, and you have the police, you have the FBI there, and out of the tunnels, you have all these bats, and Morbius flying off into the sky into the dead of night. So Milo is allegedly dead. They'll probably come up with some way to bring him back, most likely. Dr. Martine, the love interest, she's a vampire now, and they also have some, usual mid-credit scenes introducing Michael Keaton's Vulture into this universe, because that's one thing a lot of people have been asking about Morbius, is exactly which universe is it in. Is it in the same universe as Tom Holland's Spider-Man? I think it's implied that it is. Or is it in Tobey Maguire's? Or is it in the MCU? We really don't know where Morbius lies when it comes to which universe it happens to be in. He does make a comment about being Venom, jokingly, to somebody. So is Venom also in Morbius's universe along with Tom Holland's Spider-Man? What we do know is that the multiverse crack happens above the skyline sometime later, and it transports Adrian Toomes, aka Vulture, from one universe to the next universe. And so because he's not a criminal in this universe or in this Earth, then the police have to let him go. And there's another fast forward where you have Morbius driving out to the middle of nowhere in a car instead of, flying like he can do with his bats. He drives out to the middle of nowhere, and then Vulture shows up, and they talk about teaming up against Spider-Man, and that's pretty much where the film leaves off. It's not the worst comic book movie I've ever seen. It's far from the best, but with a few tweaks here and there, I think this film could have been way better than it actually was. And probably a few more bucks when it came to the CGI and special effects. They seem to do a little bit better job with Jared Leto's vampire, Morbius, and not as good when it came to the effects for Matt Smith's Milo vampire. I definitely don't expect this to make a lot of money, but it's probably going to make enough to merit a future sequel down the road. And perhaps if they get better writers for the next Morbius movie, maybe it'll do better. At least I hope that's the case. But then again, it'll probably be on par with this film. Very similar to the two Venom films with Tom Hardy. Tom Hardy's the main reason why those two films are carried. If it wasn't for him, they really wouldn't be worth watching. I don't exactly have high hopes for Morbius going forward. I don't know what their plans are. Is it going to be like a Sinister Six thing or something else entirely? Are they going to keep Morbius as an anti-hero? Are they going to make him a full-fledged villain against Spider-Man along with Vulture and a few others? I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Riley and I were interested in going to see it. We had a great time watching Spider-Man No Way Home. We're looking forward to the new Doctor Strange film. But Morbius definitely wasn't as good as Spider-Man No Way Home. Not even in the same league. But now I want to know what you thought about Morbius, for all of you that watched the film. What were some of the things you liked about it? What you didn't like about it? What you thought could have been done better? Your thoughts, views, and opinions regarding Morbius, as always, welcome below in the comments section.